So, I'm going to open up the fifth commandment today. The fifth commandment in the 10 Commandments in our Guardrails series it's kind of the linking commandment. It links the other commandments together. So the great commandment when Jesus was, it just happens when you get your Bible mismarked. It takes a while. Here we are. The great commandment, when the Pharisees are testing Jesus and they're like, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus quickly said this. You'll find it in Matthew chapter 22. Love the Lord your God with all, not some, not little, not a half portion. Love your God, Lord your God with all your heart. That's your life. All your soul, that's your spirit. All your strength, that's your ability. And love your neighbor as yourself. He quoted out of Deuteronomy chapter 6. So the first 5 books of the Old Testament are called the Torah, or the books of the law. And Jesus quotes out of Deuteronomy, and Moses in Deuteronomy is quoting out of the 10 Commandments. And then Jesus quotes out of Leviticus, which is an expression of the law. And the 10 Commandments really bear testimony to how to live out what Jesus was saying: love God with everything, love others really well. Okay? So the first 4 commandments tell us who God is and how we should worship Him. Who God is. Remember, God had liberated the Israelites out of Egypt and their polytheism and their forced slavery, and He's inviting them into a relationship, and so He's establishing a new relationship called a covenant. And the 10 Commandments are the vows that help govern and guide the relationship to be healthy, much like a marriage, right? So the first 4, God says, have no other gods before me. Don't have any God before me. Don't make an idol for yourself. That's a super bad idea. Right? Because if you have an idol, it gets in your heart. And if it gets in your heart, it'll try to become a god. And if it becomes a god, gods are before small g, before big G, and then everything's out of balance. Hey, remember my name is really important, and don't use it wrongly. That's the 3rd commandment. Paraphrase version. 4th commandment's an invitation to rest. They'd been forced into slavery. They worked 7 days a week. They worked long hours. They had no pause. And God's going, hey, I've done this before. It's really good. Let's do it together forever. What do you say? 1 day a week? Work, and rest 1 whole day. Don't be cluttered. Don't be busy. Don't be bogged down. Get energized. Let's spend time together. The 4th commandment, it gives us this illustration. Time is God's love language. And He wants time with us. He wants time with us. Isn't that good? So He's speaking in this way to say, I really want your time. It's the anti-cats in the cradle. For those of you that don't know that song, I'm really old. So as I was preparing for this week, it's not lost on me. Listen, this crowd's diverse. Some of you have had rock stars for parents. Some of you have not had rock stars for parents. Some of you have had terrific grandparents, and some of you have had absentee grandparents, physically and or emotionally, relationally. I know that this particular commandment is not easy at first glance to understand. So we're going to go through this passage because I believe substance is more important than packaging. If you're into packaging, you can find a lot of places that are going to be more into that than I'm ever going to let this place be under my leadership. Okay? So it's going to be a little clunky. You should know when it comes to this commandment, I walk with a limp. If you know my backstory, you'll understand it. If you don't, you can just choose to trust it or not. I walk with a limp. I asked a lot of people this question this week at different restaurants and through text messaging, and I want to ask you the question. As adults, honoring our parents means fill in the blank, even if fill in the blank. What would that look like in your world? I want to ask it on the front side because I want you to wrestle with it on the back side. Because, see, that's where the application comes. What's it look like? For some of us, it may feel easy. For others, it may feel hard. Here's some of the answers that I was given. By the way, the wait staff at Starliner was way more engaging than other wait staff, so you should go there and tell them they did a good job. If you've not been to Starliner, we might not be able to be friends. As adults, honoring our parents means spending time with them even when there's disappointment and dislikes. As adults, honoring our parents means showing them you still need them relationally, even if they've disappointed you previously. As adults, honoring our parents means doing the right thing even when it's not easy. As adults, honoring our parents means choosing to forget even if I want to remember. I wanted to call in sick today. I had a kidney stone Friday and Saturday night because I really would like somebody else to preach this one. You know, we often remember what we should forget, and we forget what we should remember. That's why God is clear to say, remember this, remember this, remember this. It's why over and over identifies himself as, I'm the Lord your God. Because we're really good at forgetting those things, aren't we? So let's read this one. I'm going to read the part that says my name. You read the part that says church on the next slide. Honor your father and your mother. And that was great. It was like in a round. Honor your father and your mother. It's so interesting to me that God didn't save words and just say parents. Honor your father and your mother. He is really intentional in his phrasing because it's so natural to like one more than the other at any given time in life. Right? It ebbs and flows. I'll never forget, man, when our kids were little, they wanted nothing to do with me for a long time. And then I remember when they were like a little more interested in me, and Melissa's like, what's happening? I'm like, I don't know, but it's good, right? She's like, I'm not sure. I'm like, me neither, but let's try this. Grand experiment. Because it ebbs and flows. There's these natural times, right? So it's interesting that God says honor. It's interesting what God doesn't say in this command. God tells us to love God. God tells us to love strangers. God tells us to love neighbors, people we know but maybe we struggle with. God tells us lots of things, or people that we should love, but he never tells us that we should love them here in the commands. Is that weird? Here's another thing. God doesn't tell us that we should obey them. Is it implied? See, I broke this down in Hebrew. I really dug through it. The word honor in Hebrew is kabod. And it means, the verb means it's weighty, it's heavy. It gives the illusion or the illustration of a posture, like to carry it it's kind of tough. It's kind of intentional, right? It's not flippant. It's not casual. It's the same root that we get the word glorify, but it doesn't use that here in this context because we're not to worship our parents. You know, I think a lot of people, and a younger person pointed this out to me this week. It's easy to make our parents idols and idolize our parents and then let them become a god in place of God. It's easy for parents to make kids idols and elevate our children and let them reside in the place of God. Matter of fact, we'll get to that here in just a bit. But this is unique that God would say honor. It's unique because this is the linking commandment. The first 4 tell us how to love God, and from here on it tells us how to love people. It tells us how to the display of our love for God vertically is shown horizontally in how we engage and live out life with others. And he starts with parents. Now, as I told you before, the 10 Commandments, they're singular and plural in that they have personal application and implication. They're for each one of us individually, but God was speaking to the nation of Israel collectively as well, right? Because he's God, he gets to do that. It's sort of like when you're talking to your kids and you give them a directive and you want each of them to take it personally, but it's to benefit the family holistically. This is that, okay? So God is saying, honor your father and your mother so that things are going to be good for a long time for everybody. So if only one family is really doing that on your block, you're going to be looking for sale signs because the kids are going to be nightmares, right? All your pumpkins get smashed. Forever, I wouldn't let Melissa put pumpkins out because I'm like, the kids are going to smash them. She's like, why do you live in fear of that? I'm like, I was the kid. You don't realize. Kids are evil. I mean, I've repented. I've confessed. You know, what you confess, you take power from. What you conceal, you give power to. It's all that. We work through it, I think. Here's the first thing I want you to hang on to. Honor changes with stages. Honor changes with stages. Man, I'm way out of time. Honor changes with stages. So when you're little, it looks one way. When you become an adult, it looks another way. It changes over time, right? And parents realize you have to model what that changing looks like, and you have to embrace the stages. And so if you're a helicopter parent, you need to learn when to let go of that, right? Because we have really weird parenting styles in America today, and most of them are unhealthy. We have really weird parenting models in America today, and most of them are unhealthy. Don't let the culture raise your kids, and realize honor changes with stages. When you're little, you obey everything your parents tell you, as long as your parents are not immoral or breaking the law. But it's hard to know that today because we don't teach morality. We teach situational ethics. Without moral absolutes, we have no idea of whether or not our parents are honorable. Tragic, but true. Leviticus chapter 19 says this. Each of you must respect his mother and father. It's interesting that Moses flips the order, right? The Torah elevates ladies into a position where they're not just looked down on all the time, right? It's really interesting how the Torah handles this. And I don't think this is a misprint, or I don't think it was I think it is a representation of how esteemed both fathers and mothers were. You must respect, each of you must respect his mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I'm the Lord your God. God's going, look, here's one way we do it. Let's do it together. Let's do it as families. Let's have a great time once a week. Won't this be great? Let's do it together. And then verse 32 of chapter 19, rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord. This is really what's being shared is these guardrails. They're far-reaching in impact. And here's an application: when somebody older walks in the room, you be respectful. I remember when my dad taught me that lesson. We were at a chiropractor, a town over from where we lived, and the waiting room was crowded, and an older couple came in. He was in bib overalls and a hat. I came from a farming area, and my dad said, we're going to let them sit here. You know, he told me that, and I didn't move real fast, and then I moved really fast, and I've not forgot that, you know, we give preference to those who are elders. Melissa and I were on the train in Seattle. We were going from out by the airport down to the market area a month or so ago. And in the train, you know, as often happens, it gets crowded over time, right? With each stop, it picks up. And the Seattle Sound soccer team, which, by the way, how about the crew? You better be more excited about Jesus, but that's exciting. Anyhow, they were playing, and so it was getting crowded, and this couple that was older than us, I don't know, by maybe 20 years or so, I mean, but they were standing and holding the rail, and I'm like, I need to let her sit here, but I don't want to look like a creeper and all that, and I'm like, okay, I'll try, and I'm like, man, would you like to sit here? She's like, no, that's okay. No, really, I'm fine to stand. I'm happy to stand. And she's like, no, I'm fine. Here's what's sad to me. We live in a culture that doesn't know how to receive kindness because we've forgotten what honor looks like. We really have. It grieved me that other people weren't offering other people seats on the bus or on the train. Does that make sense? Ephesians chapter 6, this is what Paul writes. Paul wrote the vast majority of the New Testament. And he has this to say about parenting and about honoring parents. And it's really important to him the way he phrases it. Here we are. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. You know, honor changes with stages. He's saying when you're young, obey. This command is written before Social Security was ever a thing, before the Great Society ever came around. And the idea is, parents, you are providing for your children, and then there's going to be a time when your children don't need your provision to sustain their life, but there will be a time where you need your children's provision to sustain your life. And so it's this is what honor looks like. This is how we live it out, right? But this is something I tell you to hang on to. Honor is learned. Therefore, it must be taught. It's learned, so we have to teach it. And there's a lot of ways to teach. But the greatest way to teach is to model it and invite them to then do it. Because more is caught than taught. And we catch it when we do it together, right? Kinesthetic learning. You know, there's a lot of, I have a really eclectic palate for entertainment, and I have categories. There's healthy food, there's junk food, and there's toxic food. And I want to guard my gates, and I want to have more healthy food, and then I want to have ho-hos in my brain, but I don't want toxic food. I don't want arsenic for my soul. So I have to be really careful that I don't let Netflix or media determine what the rating is for me, and you shouldn't either. Because a lot of things they term as okay, I've learned with my background in addiction issues, I have to guard the gates. Does that make sense? Well, let me tell you a movie I hate. So don't raise your hand if you've seen it or like it. You can take out of here what you need to, and I'm a prude on this. Self-confessing. I hate Talladega Nights. You want to know why I hate it? I tried to watch it because I like slapstick, stupid comedy. I think Adam Sandler has moments of brilliance. I think. Anyway, I'll stop. But here's the deal: Will Ferrell in that movie, is part of the reason our society is where it's at, in my opinion. I've never watched it all the way through. I've got an offended clause that if I get offended more than twice, I turn it off, because I will then cease to be able to find the redeeming value for me. You do you. Let this be the filter. Work it out. Live in your resurrection. Does that make sense? But when I wanted to go through the screen and grab them by the neck, righteous indignation, is when the grandfather was sitting at the table. I saw this scene later. Like when they were talking about how they were praying to Jesus. Yeah, that's not okay with me. Now, am I a prude? Yes, self-admitting on this. It's when the war hero grandfather was being disrespected and laughed at and ridiculed at the table, and we think that's entertaining. And they made fun of throwing his war medals in the water, in the river. I don't think that's a symptom of our society. I think it's a reflection of our society at a pronounced degree. I hate The Simpsons. If your last name's Simpson, I'm not referring to you. Came out when I was in college, and then I became a youth pastor during my time in college, before I was even finished with my degree. And I tried to get in on the Simpson bandwagon really hard. I wanted to like it. I really did, because, again, I love to laugh. I want to die with lots of wrinkles because they were laugh lines, right? I think it'd be a tragedy to die with no laugh lines. I don't want that to be my deal. I want to be like a raisin of laugh lines. So anyway, I like to laugh, and everybody in the lobby's laughing their heads off, and I'm out there, and again, I love practical jokes, all that stuff. It's my jam. I'm down with it. Until I see this kid being absolutely disrespectful to his dad. And then I see the dad being disrespectable. I mean, the guy's an idiot, right? That's what the whole series is about. It's the longest running series in television. It hit me in this way. If that is what we allow in, ultimately that becomes shaping. I had to guard the gates. I was pretty new to Jesus at the time, really new actually. And I had been that kid. I mean, it's like a documentary of my childhood without a nuclear power plant. But my dad wasn't that person, although my dad was really broken and messed up. Does that make sense? Honor is taught. If it's going to be learned. Honor is learned only if it's taught. Mark chapter 7, it's pretty interesting. Jesus has this encounter in Mark chapter 7. It's the Pharisees. I don't have time to go over it, but the Pharisees, Jesus is like, wow, you guys really are big on convenience for yourselves. You're big on convenience, and you hold on to your traditions for convenience. And what was happening, they were extorting, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the leaders of the temple, the church. They were extorting money, right? They were guilting people out of money that beyond what was required, what God had set up as the guardrails, so that they could have their own wealth, right? They were extorting people. And they were getting people to give them money from what they should have been using to take care of their parents who were elderly, right? And Jesus really is not okay with that. Now, I know it looks different in our day and age with 401ks and retirement planning and all those things. I get it. But here's the part I'd like you to hang on to. The commandments don't expire. What God spoke, Jesus affirmed, and Jesus is God. He's bringing it into current moments. They don't go away. They don't expire. In Luke chapter 18, the heading says it's the rich young ruler. This young ruler comes to Jesus, and he says, "Good teacher, what must I do to be saved?" And Jesus said, Only God's good. Why do you call me good? He's trying to help the guy realize that who he's really talking to. Let's not forget who we talk to, right? What must I do to be saved? Give me the minimum requirements. How many check marks do I have to make? And Jesus said, well, you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. You know, Jesus assumed he knew the commandments because everybody that was an Israelite knew the commandments, right? You know the commandments: don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't give false testimony, honor your father and your mother. All these I've kept since I was a boy, he said. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell everything you have, give to the poor, you'll have treasure in heaven. Follow me. Then follow me. Follow me. See, the joy is in the following. Jesus is trying to help him understand. The full expression of the Ten Commandments embraced in our life leads to a life of generosity, and he failed to get the spirit of what the commandments were intending to share in life, right? Because wealth isn't a problem unless wealth's your problem, right? So Jesus invites him into this incredible relationship. See, what the commandments, here's another data point. The commandments tell us what, Jesus shows us how. The commandments tell us what to do, Jesus shows us how to do it in full expression. What the Bible teaches what the law teaches in concept, Jesus illustrates in context. That's why I said, follow me. I'll show you how this breakdown looks. Let's do it together. What do you say? That's the whole point for Jesus. Yeah, I'll end with this. Matthew chapter 10, verses 37 and 39 say this: anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. This is Jesus talking. Anyone who loves his son or his daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Here's the big idea. Jesus is going, look, you're missing it. You're missing it. You're missing it. You guys are looking to make check marks. This was never about a check mark. It was about the relationship that can help you really have all great relationships, as much as it depends on you. Honoring my father and my mother depends on me. That has been so hard for me to accept in my life. Anybody else? Just like I didn't earn it, I don't deserve it, the grace we sing about feels the same. But God doesn't give me an exclusion clause. Doesn't mean we have to do everything our parents command when we're adults. Doesn't. Honoring my parents doesn't mean that I let them control my adult life. Doesn't mean I let them control my adult decisions. It does not mean I let them control where I spend holidays. One way for me to honor some family members better is not to be around them at the holidays. I'm being honest. Those are trigger days for me. They're hard for me in my sobriety. Is that too close? Look, I don't want to be your pastor if I can't be honest with my own life in these areas. But honoring means choosing not to hate. It means choosing to hold on to the good instead of the hard. It means choosing to give them the benefit instead of the doubt, even when the actions seem to testify loud for doubt. Does that make sense? Yeah. Honoring means doing the next right thing within the boundaries and guardrails that are healthy and good for me to be vertically aligned. Does that make sense? Doing the next right thing in order for me to be vertically aligned. Doesn't mean I have to abandon all of our guardrails and boundaries for personal health and hope. After the first service, a young lady came up who was raised in foster care. She started to share part of her story. Man, what a story. If you're a foster parent, I want to say thank you. You are heroes. You are unsung heroes. Those who do it well. And she said, I needed to be here today. I work on Sundays, and I took off work so I could be here today. And I know why. Because forgiving doesn't mean continuing to allow the hurt to wreck my life. Forgiving means I'm just choosing not to speak ill and hate them. She should have preached. She should have shared today. This is heavy. I get it. Jesus said, look, if you love your mom and dad more than me, you're not going to be able to love them very well. Does that make sense? Parents, if you love your kids more than me, you're really not going to be able to parent them very well because, see, your kids don't need you to be their friend. They don't need you to be their God. They need you to be their mom and dad. If you're not willing to take up your cross and follow me, you're not really going to understand what it means to love really well. See, this is the bottom line. If we'll love God first, He'll help us know how to love others well in the process of our resurrecting. Does that make sense? Yes. That's all I got. Super clunky landing. Julie was way better at it, right? If you were here last week, man, pilot that thing right down, seamless. I'm like, we might have hit a mountain. Yeah, we'll find out next week. As an adult, what's it look like? What's it mean for you to honor your mom and dad, even if, look, I don't know what that looks like, but I invite you to live in the tension, to invite God into the equation. Is that cool? And it'll be messy. It'll be messy. But just like an omelet, with God, it turns out worth it. That was really weird. I should only stick to what I write down. Not lost on me. Honor, it's not natural. That's why God commands us to honor, because it's not natural. When our kids were babies, they were terrorists. Hey, so were yours. Super cute terrorists. They become manipulative, really good at it, smarter than I am, like at 3. Let's be intentional, Mom and Dad. If you read Grimm's Fables, Disney wrote most of it. It wrote most of its movies off Grimm's Fables. Number 78 is the grandfather and son. It goes like this. I'm not going to quote it, but I'll give you the idea. The father was a widow, and he moved in with his son and his daughter and their boys. He would sit down at the table, and his eyes were hazy, and his hands were shaky, and he would often miss his mouth when he would try to eat. The son and daughter grew increasingly impatient and ultimately scolded him and got a bowl for him and put it over behind the stove where he could see the table but wasn't invited. And there his grandchildren and his son and daughter-in-law would eat. One day the bowl, he picked it up and dropped it, and it broke, and they scolded him again, and they got a small wooden trough and said, if you're going to eat like a pig, we'll feed you from a trough, essentially is what's happening. And then the father saw his youngest son getting wood and making a little area, and the dad said, son, what are you making? What are you doing? He said, I'm making a trough so that you and mom can eat out of it when you're old. What we model, what we endorse, what we hand off. I want to be intentional. I want to do it different. My parents did the best they knew how with what they had to work with. They really did. Love them. Wish they were still here. Really wish they were still here, so that I could honor them better, longer, and forgive them way faster, because the brokenness they lived with is that which was handed to them. I want to deal with my junk so my kids don't have to walk in my baggage. How about you? I think that's what honor looks like.